So I think my proudest accomplishment was probably that. It was doing the scariest thing that I thought at the time, and this is not an uncommon fear. This is actually the most common fear. Most people would rather die than speak in front of an audience, right? It's claustrophobia. People are terrified of it. And I was the same. So my proudest moment was when I went from crying in the bathroom, true story, right before I stepped on stage, to just saying, I'm going to do it. And walking up on stage, shaking, terrified, and I did it anyway.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. This is David, and I am here today with a repeat guest, Tara LaFon Gooch. Tara, how are you doing today?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, David.
Well, thank you for joining me again. So, Tara, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I want you to reintroduce yourself to folks, who you are, what you do.
So my name is Tara LaFon Gooch. I'm the CEO of Best Branding Solutions. I'm also a 2-time best-selling author, international TEDx speaker, and I've got a 3rd book on the way. One of the things I'm really passionate about is helping great people, purpose-driven people, mission-driven people spread their message and make global impact. So I'm so excited to share my message here today.
Yeah. So you were on my podcast almost a year ago. I was on your podcast almost a year ago. And at the time, I was episode 21 on your podcast, you're episode 20 on my podcast. And we concluded that we were both 1%ers in the sense of most people don't make it beyond episode 20. So, well, I think we both made it beyond episode 20, haven't we? Now that we're talking, right?
That's right.
So you focused, the last time we chatted, you focused a lot on your first book, How to Grasp Confidence and Own Your Power.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, the GRASP, that was an acronym for your methodology for gaining confidence. But could you talk a little bit about, again, like, for yourself, what was your journey with confidence and what led you to writing that first book? And then we'll talk about what's coming up as well.
Yeah. Well, my whole life, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to this, I never felt like I fit in, right? I always kind of felt like the outlier, never understood these kind of things. And it was really hard for me growing up. I was always the shy kid. And confidence was always this like elusive trait. It was really hard for me to stand up for myself, to negotiate, to talk to people. And it was all of these mental blocks and these stories for my entire life that I kept telling myself that I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, that there's something about me that's not quite there, right? And why do other people, how can they just walk into a room and it seems like they have this magic about them that people are attracted to them like magnets? And I always thought that was for other people. Must be nice. I wish I could have that, but I guess that's just their personality. And, as I got older, I realized that, this lack of confidence was actually holding me back, not just in relationships, but also in work, in business. It was impacting the level of money I was making as well, right? Because again, if you're lacking confidence, you tend to not negotiate for yourself, right? And advocate for yourself. So I kind of always felt like I was getting the short stick and again looked at other people as if, I wish I could have that. And it wasn't until I went on this journey to gain confidence for myself that I realized that it's possible for anyone, regardless of what you've been through in life or where you are now, that you can gain confidence. And I think that's really imperative. And there's a great quote from the Carnegie Institute of Technology that I reference frequently. And that says that 85% of our financial success in our lifetime is due to 3 things: our ability to communicate, negotiate, and lead. 15% of our financial success is actually due to technical knowledge. So that tells me that 85% of success is actually due to these interpersonal skills. And part of that, a huge part of that, is confidence.
Yeah. So you wrote this book. It became an international bestseller. I think you were on many news channels talking about it as well. You recently, I think it was in January this year, you did a TEDx talk over in the
Yeah,
UK. Is that right?
that's correct.
Yeah, and it was about gratitude and the role of confidence. You want to talk a little bit about that TEDx talk you did? And by the way, you can we'll link this later in the editing, like that TEDx talk that you did. So you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that and how that landed with the audience?
Yes. Again, one of those things, right? It's when you have a message that's really transformational, not just motivational, right? My goal was not to deliver a motivational message because a motivational message gets people energy for about 5 minutes, 30 seconds to 5 minutes,
Yeah.
right? That was not my goal. I didn't want to deliver motivation because motivation is fleeting. What I wanted to deliver was actual transformation. So I knew that, I have a 5 step method to gain confidence for personal development. But for a TEDx talk, that's much too long, right? Because you're only on stage for 18 minutes or less. So I thought about what is the one thing? What is the one thing, the most important thing I could teach somebody right now that would actually transform their lives? And that was gratitude. And my TEDx title is called Gratitude, the Foundation of Confidence for that reason. It's the first 3 chapters of my first book, and it's the foundational layer that actually builds self esteem. And a lot of people don't realize this. We think of self esteem sometimes as, all of these other factors. Maybe they're born with it. Maybe it's their personality type. Maybe it's their environment, their relationships. Yes, it's all of these factors, but it really starts, David, within.
You talk a lot about gratitude, and that's the G in grasp,
That's
GRASP, right?
Yep.
What what do you do around gratitude that's helped with your confidence?
Well, gratitude is, I call it the law of increase, right? So that's why I start with gratitude. When you start to appreciate who you are, when you start to appreciate even little things about yourself, even some of your past struggles, maybe your current struggles, you start to see the silver lining in just about any situation, right? So even if you've come from a background of adversity or struggle, instead of thinking of it as something that's holding you back, what if you thought of it as a teacher? Now you've completely flipped the game. And then that gratitude you can have for any circumstance that you've been through can take your mindset from one of a victim mentality to a victor mentality. And all of a sudden you realized instead of it as something that has held you back, you realize that it is something that is actually propelling you forward. Right? So I was actually talking to somebody about this last night, and it's the language we use is so, so, so important. And over text message, they were saying, I've been held down my whole life. And I said, the longer you talk like that, the longer that will be true. The longer you talk like that, the longer that will be a fact. And we put these words out there and say these things, and they concrete solidify. And it becomes a mental block, right? So I actually refer to gratitude as I think of it as a ninja inside my mind. It's a ninja mindset to where I can take any situation now and completely turn it around very quickly and realize the gratitude in it, and it gives me more confidence. So I'll give you a quick example. I quote unquote failed last week to secure a contract. Now, I could look at that and say, oh gosh, I'm a failure. What a missed opportunity. I should have done all of these things, dot, dot, dot. My ninja mindset kicked in and I said, I am so grateful I failed at that because that means something even larger is coming down the pipeline. And if I would have secured that, I wouldn't have been able to capture the larger thing that is meant for me. A couple days later, you know what happened? A larger thing came.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It happens, right?
Yep.
The words we use are very important.
The words we use is very important. Absolutely. And I wish this skill was taught is to hope the skill is being taught to more people. And you're one of the major multipliers and catalysts here spreading this as you say, it's not motivation, it's transformation. It's literally like what I appreciate is step by step. You are talking about how you can actually literally grasp confidence with your grasp framework. This victim mentality, I'm very passionate about it because one of the things I like to do is talk to people who are years ahead of me, who have been through life. And at least in the past, I thought, they've known a thing or two. They probably have a pretty solid mindset on things. But what I realize is folks who are like 60 something, 70s, even 80s, there's a lot of people with regrets. And at the heart of it, and there's a lot of, oh, I wish I did this, or this happened to me, and that happened to me, and this person did this to me. There's a lot of victimization. Like, I am the victim. And what I realize is that, like, first of all, age doesn't determine how confident you are in yourself. But second of all, is that what you're saying is when you take away, I'm a victim here, I'm being held down. Okay, maybe, but what are you doing about it? There's the proverbial hand pushing you down. What are you doing to move around it? And it's I think that is so important. That reframing in your mind, it's not happening to me. There's something happening for me. So how am I using this right now? This just gets me so riled up in a good way, right? Because the victimization, self-victimization is probably one of the things I really hope that are, especially the younger generation. You're old when you start saying the younger generation. I hope they are learning this, right? And as much as folks want to say, hey, you're a victim of your circumstance or victim of whatever, you need to take control. You need to take responsibility. The R in grasp. You need to take responsibility for the situation and do something about it. So I'm really happy that we have folks like you teaching this. And I do hope it starts with the people who are much younger than me, because they're going to be the leaders of the future. They're going to be the next generation of leaders and learning about that self. And so I guess on that topic, this sort of leads into what I want to ask you next is that you've written 2 books. I think they're right over your shoulder there. So the Grasp Confidence and Talk Your Way to the Top. So now you're working on a 3rd book about leadership and starting with the self. Can you talk more about that 3rd book you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first book, How to Grasp Competence and Own Your Power, is very much a personal development book, right? The second iteration to that is going to be How to Grasp Confidence and Own Your Power in Leadership. So, this is really important. It's taking the same 5 steps framework and applying it to not only yourself, but to others, right? To lead a team. Now, this is important because leadership doesn't start with some extraneous factor. When we typically think of leadership models, they start with everybody else. But what I've found is it really starts from within. And until we as leaders can, harness this, we'll call it the responsibility, the emotional intelligence that's required to lead others and, lead ourselves ultimately, it's not going to translate. So this is pretty important because, in this age of AI, when we're super high tech, everything's driven by, tech and the latest thing. What I'm finding is that it's about going back to those basic things, those fundamentals, those foundational elements, because even as we progress with technology, what we're going to crave even more is connection. And I don't know about you, but I found this in my personal life that we're more connected than ever on paper, right? We can go on our phone, we can talk to anybody from around the world. You're in Canada, I'm in North Carolina, and we're connected on a level, but it's not a deep seated connection. So I think, even as technology continues to evolve, we're going to crave more of that. And people are going to gravitate more towards those, we'll call it foundational principles that are long withstanding, right? So the leadership models going forward into the future are about that real, genuine human connection and ultimately the emotional intelligence that goes into leadership, not just with ourselves, but through others.
Yeah. It When I think about how leadership has been traditionally, it traditionally has been very much a top down, listen to me, what I say goes. If Tara says anything contrary to what I think, then, you can find a new job next week, right? That's traditional leadership, unfortunately, very top down. What at least, I'm seeing in my world is more of a switch towards what my friend Brianne Ligori says, side by side leadership. She calls it that. I try to do my best in doing that. I say do my best is I do my best, literally, right? It is partnering with the people who work with you and for you, is partnering with them, and you get better buy-in with anything. You get more passion for whatever you do. But all that starts by understanding who you are and what you want to be and who you want to be. So, for example, I talk a lot about success here on this podcast. What is success to you? Do you even understand what success means? If a success means I met this dollar figure, your how is going to be pretty atrocious. Your how is, and I've talked to many folks on this podcast who said, I wish I didn't do that when I was younger. So I guess like when you look at leadership, when you look at where you want to see things going in leadership and the role of confidence, where do you see that intersecting in the near future?
Yeah. Well, I'll have an analogy about that real quick. So, have you ever skydived?
I've watched a lot of skydiving.
Well, I've never done it. I don't think I'll ever jump out of a perfectly operational plane,
I'm good on solid
right?
ground.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not worried about the jumps. It's the sudden landings I don't enjoy.
But, if you think about that analogy, how much confidence do you have in the person packing your chute?
Mm.
Is there a bigger level of trust that and confidence that you have to have than that person packing your chute? You don't know what they're doing, and chances are, if it's your first time, you have no understanding of what it takes to go in there, right? So you have to have a high level of confidence in that person and their ability to do their job. So, what does confidence actually translate to? So, when I'm talking about confidence in leadership, I'm actually talking about competence and trust. And if you've ever seen a skydive team, they're holding their hands together and, forming this unique shape as they're descending back down. Can you tell who the leader is? Not really. Yeah, they all look the same. They're on a team. So, this is important. When we're thinking about confidence in leadership, it's about somebody's perception of you that you're competent in your role and they trust you. One of the things that you can do that is so, so simple for them to trust you is the very start of any conversation you have with them. What does this mean, right? And that kind of goes back to gratitude. So, if we're thinking about trust and competence and leadership, when we think of a micromanager, let's say, so somebody that comes to you and says, Jim, you didn't do your reports today, or you're lagging behind on your sales. What's going on? That's how you start a conversation. So, I want to take a moment to think about what is actually happening in that person's brain. Okay, so we all have the same physiology pretty much. If I bridge a conversation, that's how I start a conversation with somebody. Do you think they're going to be very receptive? Do you think they're going to be trustworthy of what comes next? No. So, how do you make somebody receptive to what you have to say? You start a conversation with gratitude, and there's actual scientific reasons behind this. So, if I start a conversation with somebody, what happens is it goes into the ear, just again, we have the same physiology, and it goes into the base of that person's brain. That's where information goes first. Well, the base of the brain is not the high level thinking center. I think we can all agree on that. And then from there, it transverses and travels and goes through the limbic system of that person's brain. Now, the limbic system is the I feel here center of their brain. So, in other words, they feel emotion, right? And then all the way to the last and final destination is the prefrontal cortex, which is the think rationally way over here. So, in other words, when we approach a conversation, regardless of what it is, the other person is going to feel before they can think. Now, this is really important in leadership, and this is why this framework works not just for self, but for others. Everything starts with us, right? And it's that intellectual knowing that how are we responsible for the outcome of whatever situation happens, right? So if you start, imagine going from and making that switch, and instead of starting with, boom, this is what I need, dot, 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 instead of saying that, why don't we start a conversation with gratitude, which immediately primes someone's brain to be receptive to our message and to begin to trust that whatever that comes next, they're actually ready to hear. And it doesn't put them in that immediately, that fight, flight, or freeze mode
Yeah.
and defensive survival mode. This is an absolute game changer. And this is one of the huge principles that I want to really convey is that regardless of who we're talking to, regardless of who our employees are, we have the same physiology. And it's understanding that other person. So if you want to build trust and make that other person feel like they can not only trust you, but that you're competent in your role as well as a manager or
Mm-hmm.
as a leader, as a CEO, it starts by going again back to those basics. So regardless of where we're going in tech or with this world and the new inventions and things like that, people are going to stay the same. So really learning these things is key, so that we can build trust. And again, what does that translate to? That's not just our employees, but it's also our clients, our investors, our partners. Again, people are people. We're the same. So really understanding that and honoring that is huge game changer in leadership.
Yeah. The connection at a human level. There's a lot of talk about. I think you can't turn on any channel nowadays without hearing AI. AI. There's a joke meme by this guy named he's called the Corporate Bro, and yeah, and he makes fun of Silicon Valley, and he said all the meme was, here's all keynotes in 2023. He walks on stage, AI, crowd goes wild. Thank you. He walks off the stage. And so unfortunately there's been a lot of hype, but there's this, talk about, oh, AGI, artificial general intelligence, will take over humans and such. Here's the thing is that I feel that unless this technology has a way of connecting with me and we detect warmth, we detect authenticity, we detect this feeling of connection. Unless I feel that with whoever I'm talking to, and I'm not convinced yet that a bunch of silicon wafers and such have that ability. Until it does, I can't feel comfortable just talking to a machine about my deepest and darkest troubles or having a podcast. Like, can you really read my cues and what I'm feeling right now and how emotional I am about something or how passionate I am? I hope that doesn't happen, right? But you're right. Like, humans need that energy coming from the other individual to feel a connection, to feel that trust. So, you talk a lot about that competence and trust, right, in leadership, and I agree with that. What else do what else do you hit on?
Yeah, it's a responsibility, that we have as leaders to the people that are on our teams, to again anyone that comes in contact with us in life. Leadership is not, confined in four walls in an office in some building somewhere. It's about being a leader in all aspects of life, right? So, one of the tenets that I'm very passionate about with leadership is to leave every situation better than you found it. And if a situation or a person or anybody that you're interacting with is worse off from your interaction with them, that is a call to look inward. Because that is one of the very first tenets of leadership, in my opinion, is to leave everything better than you found it. That's a true leader, right? Because it starts within, and then we have to have that responsibility as well, that ownership, to examine our behaviors, to examine the results, and to say, is there something I could have done differently? And is there something that I can continue to do to propel this forward, right? To change, whatever it is. So in my book, I actually reference a quote from my late grandfather. He was a World War II Army veteran. So he joined the military during World War II and he enlisted in the Army. Now, he had flat feet. So when he would run and do these boot camps and these drills, at the end of it, his feet would bleed to the point where he had to pour blood out of his boots. It was that, serious, right?
Yikes.
So, but his leadership saw something much bigger for him than he even saw for himself. And one of the things that they decided to do for him was to take him out of just the regular boot camp army and put him in military intelligence. Well, this transition was huge for him. And he actually became a colonel and rose to the ranks of being a colonel in military intelligence. And he was responsible, him and other allied forces were responsible for liberating the country of Belgium and freeing them from Nazi occupation. He could have been a ground level soldier, or he could have risen through the ranks. And the powerful thing about that story is that sometimes we don't see it within ourselves, but if our leadership team can see something within us, then it's our responsibility to give them a hand, pull them up, and show them the way. Because a successful person does not throw down the ladder from which they rise.
Mm.
A successful person does not view another person, especially someone on their team or an employee, as competition. They view them as a collaborator to work for the greater thing. And he shared a quote with me when I was a little girl, and I had no idea what he was talking about, right? I had to go through my own life journey to really grasp what he was saying. And he said that a fish rots from the head down. I had no idea what he was talking about. But what he meant is that this literal analogy of a fish, right? It doesn't rot from the tail up, it rots from the head down. And we can apply this in business and within our own companies and teams and say, is this my responsibility or where is the disconnect, right? And again, it's having that emotional intelligence to see that high level view, that big picture thinking.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Tara, for sharing that story. Yeah, I have a lot more questions around what your grandfather did, but he definitely sounds like a hero there, him and the team he worked with. But you talk about the fish. Geez,
Yeah,
I was just reflecting the impact of an incompetent and untrusted leader is 10 times worse than a incompetent and untrusted individual contributor. And the higher up a leader goes, the worse their impact is on the organization. So that's how cultures are built or destroyed based on who the leaders are. And that's why we're talking. We want to build good leaders, great leaders that multiply the great effects of leadership, right? So some rapid fire questions for you. Is that okay?
sure.
First question. What's your favorite book on confidence?
Besides mine,
That's why I asked it. I wanted to see if you're going to say that. But apart from your own, right? What is your favorite book that teaches confidence?
you know, I don't know if I have a specific book that I would say is my favorite book on teaching quote unquote confidence as a subject, but I've recently read Liz Elting's book, which is Dream Big and Win. And while her book isn't technically about the subject of confidence, it teaches us that regardless of where we are in life, we can build empires, we can accomplish our dreams, we can do anything we want. And her story was really amazing. She started her company, a former company, she sold it now, it was Trans Perfect, in her dorm room in NYU. And she would make hundreds of calls a day, hundreds of calls today. And when I asked her what was her biggest catalyst for this growth, she said it was action and a belief in herself. And regardless of how many times she got rejected, because you do get rejection plenty, especially if you're cold calling, It's about smiling and picking up the next as if the past rejection never happened, and having that belief in yourself and in your service that, you know what, you're worthy and you're going to actually add value to the other person's life or business. So keep doing it. And that was really powerful for me to learn that lesson. I'm sure you appreciate that being in sales.
And actually, it goes back to right before we started this podcast this morning. You said, "I just keep on chugging along. I keep on going." And I understand. I understand that mentality, that resilience. I'm very fortunate. I work with people like that all day, who they hear no 10 times a day, yet they keep going. Okay, we'll find another way. Okay, we'll find another way. Right. And that's a very, very strong quality and important quality. Next question. For anyone who is struggling with confidence, what's one piece of advice you would give to them?
One piece of advice I would give is that it's possible. It's, again, don't look at this as something that other people have. Regardless of your level of confidence, everybody has a level of confidence. So I do want to say that. And for those of you that may be listening to this and saying, I don't have confidence, I'm not confident about anything, I challenge you. What are you good at? Start looking at your strengths. What do you like to do, right? Because everybody likes to do something. They're strong at something. Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's baking. Maybe you're really confident about your ability to do spreadsheets. Maybe you're really confident about your ability to post on social media. It doesn't matter what it is. What are you confident in? And if you can find one area you're confident in, chances are you're going to find another and another and another and another. And then you start appreciating who you actually are. And all of this being said, I didn't gain anything from outside of me at any point in time. I just realized what I already had within me. And then once you acknowledge what you already have, your strengths, your natural gifts, it's really easy then to nurture them and to make them grow. It's really hard to make something grow that you don't acknowledge. So the first level is that self-acknowledgement and understanding where you are as a baseline so that you can continue to nurture it and grow it and lean into those strengths. And you never know where that could lead you, honestly.
Thanks, Tara. Last one of these rapid fires. What's your proudest accomplishment?
My proudest accomplishment has probably been a combination of, speaking on stage, because I was terrified to do that at one point in time. Again, I was severely lacking that confidence. So I think my proudest accomplishment was probably that. It was doing the scariest thing that I thought at the time. And this is not an uncommon fear. This is actually the most common fear. Most people would rather die than speak in front of an audience, right? It's claustrophobia. People are terrified of it. And I was the same. So my proudest moment was when I went from crying in the bathroom, true story, right before I stepped on stage, to just saying, I'm going to do it. And walking up on stage, shaking, terrified. And I did it anyway. That was a catalyst of growth for me that enabled me to write books, share my story, and keep speaking, keep doing things like that. So I would say, your proudest moments are never going to be the things you do every day necessarily, but it could be the one thing that you don't want to do, but gives you an immense amount of growth and potential going forward into the future. So while you should appreciate your inner strengths and gifts, you should also look to things that scare you a little bit that could give you growth and potential, and just start dipping your toe in the water and see what happens.
Dip your toe in the water. See
That's
what
right.
happens. All right. I ask every guest this one question at the end. What's one question I haven't asked you, but I should have asked you in our time together?
Ooh, that's a fun question. David, you're on fire. I like that. So, one question that you didn't ask is maybe, a lot of leadership models, again, we're talking about leadership, talk about purpose being first. Mine is actually last. So, that's a distinction I want to point out. Why is purpose not my first step? And I get this question a lot. One of the reasons is because if you're in a state, let's say a state of self where you're lacking confidence, where you don't acknowledge your own gifts, where you don't have gratitude for who you are or the life of around you, are you going to be able to see that pinnacle of purpose? Or is it going to seem elusive to you, like you can't see the forest through the trees? If you have to start somewhere, so that gratitude is that foundational level that builds everything else upon it. Because if you're at a state, let's say if you're suffering from depression or anxiety or trauma, even, right? It's going to be really hard for you to see that purpose, that North Star. So this is all about going to basics, because the World Health Organization has said that depression is actually the leading cause of disability worldwide. Not a lot of people know that or talk about it. So it's all about how to elevate ourselves and get ourselves out of that fogginess so that we can eventually see the clarity that is the purpose, which we all have inside us.
Right. Tara, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So if people need to find you, where do they find you and how do they find out what are you up to right now?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on every social media network, really: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I have accounts there. I'm on there all the time. But you can also visit my website, TaraLaFonGooch.com. My company's website is bestbranding.solutions, and my books are available on Amazon. My podcast is everywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Right, Tara. Well, thank you very much. This is a wonderful podcast, almost 40 minutes now, and time flew by. I appreciate you making the time today.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Don't hang up. I'm just going to stop the recording.